Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer where we're going to dive into a truly fascinating shift that is happening right now in software development. If you've been working in tech lately, you've probably felt this friction firsthand. It's this subtle tug of war between the fast-paced, agile methodologies we all know and love and the brand new AI tools we're all desperately trying to figure out how to use. So let's just dive right into this. Today, we are unpacking a really incredible piece from the Dacia blog that explores how AI agents are unexpectedly disrupting our established workflows. It perfectly puts into words something a lot of teams are struggling with right now when it comes to how we actually plan and build software. So here is a core paradox. AI writes code almost instantly, right? So basic logic dictates Agile should get faster, our iteration cycle should shrink to zero, and we should all be shipping at absolute warp speed. But reality is telling us a completely different story. Let's just hang on this question for a second, because it really is the elephant in the room. If implementation is suddenly so cheap and so fast, why aren't our Agile teams just flying? Well, the answer actually requires us to look back at the methodologies we thought we left behind in the dark ages of software development. All right, Section 1, the Waterfall Boogie. Do you remember the old classical waterfall days? Both requirements and implementation were just incredibly expensive. You'd spend literally months writing these highly detailed specs, followed by months of coding. And the classic tragedy of it all? By the time you actually shipped, the requirements had changed, and you delivered something nobody actually wanted. Developers absolutely hated writing those heavy, dense specs. And Agile was the industry's reaction to that exact pain. The entire philosophy was built around this idea of just enough, just in time. Agile reduced the massive upfront cost of requirements by allowing specs to evolve iteratively through short cycles and really tight feedback loops. You didn't waste months writing the wrong code. You just iterated based on what you learned. Moving on to Section 2, enter the AI disruptor. So here is where the real friction kicks in. Think about human developers. We can hear a totally vague prompt, ask a few clarifying questions in a morning stand-up, make some judgment calls, and course correct based on pure instinct. AI agents, on the other hand, they completely fail at vague prompts. They bake wrong assumptions several layers deep into the code and silently miss the entire point. That just-in-time ambiguity that humans so easily navigate results in AI producing technically correct code that is practically useless. If we actually want to make AI effective, we can no longer just say, hey, here's a rough idea, go figure it out. That level of ambiguity, which a skilled human developer would flag immediately, becomes a silent, totally wrong decision by an AI that you probably won't discover until 3 sprints later. Because to function well, AI absolutely demands precision. We're talking precise system behavior, edge cases, data contracts, error conditions, and high-level design. Ironically, to get good code out of an AI, we literally have to go back to creating highly detailed specs, the exact same stuff we used to complain about as heavy waterfall ceremony. Which brings us to Section 3, the new cost equation. Look at how the underlying economics of building software have just completely flipped here. Under classical waterfall, both requirements and code were expensive, which was super painful when things changed. Agile gave us cheap requirements with the exact same expensive code cost, making those changes tolerable. But now, AI agents require expensive, precise requirements, but generate incredibly cheap code, which leads us to a massive, glaring unknown. So, what exactly is the outcome here? What happens when writing the code itself becomes practically free, but writing the spec suddenly becomes the hardest, most expensive part of your day? Well, the answer is that the cost of being wrong has fundamentally shifted. It's moved entirely from the implementation side over to the specification side. Being wrong about requirements is no longer catastrophic in terms of coding hours. I mean, if code is cheap, you just delete it and regenerate it, right? Therefore, writing a bad spec that churns out bad code really fast, that is your biggest bottleneck now. And that leads right into Section 4, code as a validation tool. We are stepping into an entirely new workflow here. First, you write a spec. Next, you generate an implementation. Then you put it in front of users. And finally, you learn, rewrite the spec, and regenerate. We aren't perfecting code as some precious, fragile artifact anymore. We are using cheap, almost disposable AI-generated code as a probe. We're literally using it just to validate if we wrote the right requirements in the first place. Now, this isn't entirely unprecedented in software history. The source points out that it actually mirrors test-driven development, or TDD. Remember that? Where you wrote the validation, the test, first to drive the actual implementation. It forced total clarity about what the code was supposed to do before you wrote a single line of production code. But looking at this timeline, history definitely offers a cautionary tale. Waterfall dominated, then Agile shifted the focus. TDD peaked in the early 2010s until 2014, when David Heinemeier Hansson famously declared that TDD is dead. And why? Because it perfectly showed us exactly what happens when a genuinely good idea goes way too far. And that sets up Section 5 perfectly, avoiding the methodology trap. The big lesson from TDD isn't that validating first was a bad idea. It's that it became a rigid methodology. And let's face it, methodologies tend to become a religion. Just like TDD kind of lost its way when developers started writing tests just for the sake of writing tests, we are facing a massive trap today with AI. We can honestly call this the spec-first trap. If writing a detailed spec then generate code turns into our new religion, we are going to lose sight of reality. We'll end up writing specs just for the sake of writing specs. We'll create these dense, perfect documents that completely satisfy the AI pipeline, but totally ignore what actual human users need. And if the spec becomes the actual deliverable, well, congratulations, we've effectively created Waterfall with extra steps. So, to be clear, this is not just some nostalgic return to Waterfall. It's a profound structural change. The cost curve has completely changed right underneath us. The flow isn't a straight line anymore. It's cycles. But those cycles are driven by spec quality now, not code quality. Today, the spec is the expensive, human irreplaceable part of the whole shebang. So, between the Agile purists who want to keep things totally loose and vague, and the reality of AI agents demanding heavy, rigid detail, where should we actually sit on the requirements detail spectrum today? The answer the author gives is honestly brilliant in its simplicity. More than you think. Just don't make it a religion. You absolutely need far more upfront specs to succeed with AI than Agile ever taught us to be comfortable with. But whatever you do, please don't forget the human element of actually building things that users want to use. Specs are literally just a tool to get you there. So, here's my final question for you to chew on. How are you going to adapt your own workflow tomorrow without falling into the religion trap? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep building smart.